Well, welcome everyone to our Writers Chat. This is our sixth one in the series. And today we're going to explore what it means to be cruel to be kind, cutting and editing your work. And with us today, we have Dr. Jonathan Sherbino. And just to give you a little bit of background about Dr. Jonathan Sherbino, he is the Assistant Dean of Merit. He's a professor in the Department of Medicine and the past chair of the Royal College Emergency Medicine Specialty Committee, the co-editor of CanMed's 2015, and co-founder of the Royal College Area Focused Competence Clinical Educator. He is the co-host of the Key Literature and Medical Education Keyline podcast, which has an audience in 80 countries around the world. Jonathan's program of research is in diagnostic reasoning, and recently, in this past April, he was awarded the 3M National Teaching Fellowship, Canada's most prestigious recognition of excellence in educational leadership and teaching at the post-secondary level. So we're delighted to have you with us today, Jonathan, and we're looking forward to some of your thoughts on what it means to be cruel to be kind and cutting and editing your work and the work of others on your team. So I'm going to open it up to you for just giving us your thoughts, and then anyone has any questions at any time, feel free to pop it into the chat and I will facilitate those questions as well.
Thanks so much, Ilana. I'm pleased to be here this morning. I'll apologize. My lighting is not very good. It's probably a sign of how many Zoom calls I'm on. I just burnt through my ring light after endless hours. So I need something else to come from Amazon later this week. And that just happened last night. I think there's three important lessons I want to kind of share from my own experience. And by no means do I consider myself an expert, but I have been on many, the receiving end, and have also been the provider of edits and feedback on many projects. And so I think I have the scars and the hard-won lessons learned that I would like to share. And I think the first most important piece when you're doing any type of ask for feedback of, can you help me work through this project, is to make sure you understand and really set and refine what the request is. There's different kinds of requests that are underneath that tone of, can you give me some feedback on this paper? Sometimes it really means I'm having a hard time. I'm feeling really kind of burnt out by this project, and I need a friend or a colleague to kind of pump my tires a bit and boost me up. And if that's the undercurrent of the request, and you come in saying, oh, I hate the introduction and your transition paragraphs don't make any sense, what really was the intent of, can you just give me some attaboys and a pat on the back and tell me it's going to be okay and that this project will eventually get done, you're going to undo that relationship. So the words might be the same, can I get some feedback, but the intent can be really different. So you want to refine that request. When it's apparent that that individual is really in that state saying, I have a manuscript, I'm really stuck, can you help me move it forward? The next question should be, at what level of granularity? And there's two kind of main ways I think about it. Are you going to be an editor, like truly start to copy edit the text, or are you going to be a reviewer? And I think how you are positioned in authorship will be important to consider that. Very often I will look at a paper and just provide some general comments and go through it as a reviewer, as if I was a peer reviewer of that manuscript that was going to a journal, without an expectation of authorship. And the level of engagement would be something that I could do in the course of probably an hour, reading through that paper and understanding it, picking out major themes, identifying major pieces, with the expectation that the amount of work and investment reflects what's been asked. I've been asked to take a kind of a global, comprehensive look. Versus being that editor, truly being a copy editor, and ensuring that you meet the criteria for authorship. Simply working on the review of a paper is not enough under the ICMJE criteria. But if I'm part of the team, and now it's my turn to work on the manuscript and provide that copy editing, being clear that this is the point where you want that to happen. Because investing a ton of time and effort at the copy editing stage, where you start proofing, where you start wordsmithing, and where you start rearranging pieces, can be poorly timed if you're getting a very early version of a manuscript from the principal author that is looking for, do the general ideas and the general argument that's been laid down at this point make sense? And so you just want to be very clear upfront. Most important lesson is refine what that request is. Can I get some feedback on the paper is not enough. it probably involves a small, brief dialogue of, do you just want me to look at it and tell you this project is worthwhile and it's moving along and has meaning? And if it's truly you want me to dig in and start to find areas to improve the manuscript, at what level of granularity and what investment of time, a higher level, more brief as a reviewer, major themes, or much more specific with hours invested in the manuscript, rewriting, wordsmithing, rearranging, and capturing all that. So that's point number one. The second thing I think I've learned the hard way is being very specific with the type of comments that you want to make. Saying the syntax is poor doesn't really help anybody. Saying, I don't get your argument doesn't really help anybody. Saying you've simply duplicated your results in the discussion and you've said it twice doesn't really help anybody. You need to come down from you may start with that general example, but even if you're at the more reviewer stage without doing the copy editing, you might want to say, in this sentence, here's an example. Here's how you might reframe it so that they can see things that are there. Or you might want to say, the line of argument doesn't make sense because A to B is a big logical jump that I can't get past. And so when you are providing things that are if your answers are 3 words or less, you're not doing a good job as a reviewer. That's probably a good rule of thumb. And so you may not need to write entire paragraphs for the individual if you're just at that reviewer rather than the copy editor role. But you probably need a sentence or two to really unpack and be specific, and much preferably give an example about what that looks like. Then the last part is, I'm going to steal the line from the Lingard-Watling article I think was circulated. I think they said it far better than I can, which is, don't kill the joy. The best example of when I did this, I was writing a paper with some colleagues and we were using Google Docs. And I was the senior investigator on the paper. It had gone through probably 3 revisions when it came to me. And I broke Google Docs. And this was on me. I rewrote it so much that it was hard to see. And they had to go back to previous versions, save it, take it out of Google Docs, take it into Word, merge subsequent versions so that all the changes could be seen, because it looked like a package of crayons had exploded digitally into the Google Doc because there was so much track changes and suggested edits. And I didn't think much about it. I thought I had been asked, to the true, hey, I don't need an attaboy. Just really do the copy editing piece. I thought we were at a far enough page process in the authorship process that I could get at this. And I thought we had good relationship with the team. Subsequently, I discovered that there had to be some, crisis intervention between some of the other authors with the first author to smooth feathers and say, okay, it's going to be okay, just because it looks like every word is different, is not a reflection of the quality of the draft that was provided. And so that's a mistake I made, and a pretty egregious example of that, one that you would imagine or hope that I would have more insight into. But in that process, it was so significant in the way that I just simply said, edits are in, and without any kind of contextualization of, I've really tried to reorganize this and work with what we have. The first glance of when you saw nothing stayed as original, that's an example of killing the joy. And so what I try to do, particularly with people that I'm working with for the first time, is say, you know what, when you ask me to do that copy editing piece, I'm going to do this in kind of intensive work, and I will send so that they're kind of forewarned, or there's a sense of anticipation of what's going to come back. And then I usually have a bit of a covering, a few paragraphs of, there's some really strong pieces here. The general argument is this. I really like to see what we are. And now I've just helped to try to change the way we communicate it in a slightly different way. You'll see what you like. And with the caveat, of course, that you don't have to accept any of it. It's just one person's perspective. But that don't kill the joy can sometimes quickly get lost, particularly if you're finding yourself in that space where there's a whole bunch of manuscripts coming to you. You're trying to be as efficient, as effective with your time, and you're just simply plowing through them in kind of a robotic mindset, failing to remember that there's another human being on the other side of that paper. So despite the cruel to be kind metaphor, I don't think we should ever be cruel. And I don't think any of us would ever intentionally be cruel, but not being thoughtful about how a big mess of edits or a big cutting of work could be anticipated. Unintentionally, we could be perceived as being cruel. And that's not good for anyone's professional or academic life, or their the way that they want to kind of exist. It just doesn't. It takes the excitement out of the project that originally brought you to it. So those are my big 3 points. Learn the hard way. I haven't told you all the mistakes that I've made because that would take most of the morning. But I think you should be really specific and refine what that request is. Do you really want feedback? And then when you are in the process of giving feedback, if it's just general comments and if you're just giving like 3-word answers, then you're probably not being helpful. And the last part is be thoughtful about who's on the other end of that conversation. And I don't think you should be cruel, because I don't think you can be cruel and kind as a whole together. I think you should make sure that you don't kill the joy.
Thanks so much, Jonathan, for those 3 tips. And, I really think kind of putting in that perspective is that kind of cruel to be kind. There are times I think we do give feedback that we are not intentionally meaning to be cruel. We're trying to help move the writing forward, or help the learner or whoever or team member that we are working with move their writing forward. And are there times that you've given feedback where you sort of pare down the feedback, I guess, of how much feedback do you give at once? Because how much is the other person able to absorb in terms of the feedback with their writing?
I think it all depends on the type of relationship and the stage of who the other author or authors are. And people who are farther along in their career, and this is not the first time they've been through the whole writing process, probably have an anticipation of what this can look like. People that you've worked with before will get a sense of what your writing style and your editing style is like. And the depth and specificity of how much you are sharing back will all depend on where that manuscript is in terms of, is this the very first draft or not? With a reminder that, I think the first draft is always terrible, but you just get it down on paper and get it out there, and then look at it and be mortified that this is something that you might even attach your name to. Work on that first draft privately by yourself to get it to some place where you can actually show someone who you have, a secret agreement never to share what that second draft, so-called first draft, actually is, and understand that the depth of review there will be a lot deeper. On occasion, though, I'll find myself getting into a paper and I'm not even through the introduction, and there are really substantive foundational things that need to happen. And I probably will pause at that point and say, listen, I've gotten through the introduction, or I've gotten through the results, or whatever, wherever we're at, and I haven't moved on to the next part, because I think there's a whole bunch of interesting things that you and I should negotiate and understand before we move forward. So for me, that serves the self-sustaining purpose of not having to do extra work on a manuscript that's going to have to go through a major revision. And so I've kind of truncated or parceled out one bite rather than trying to take the entire bite of the entire manuscript. And for the recipient of getting those edits or of getting that feedback, it's okay. All right, so we're just really focusing on this area, and I don't need to see the introduction pulled apart, the results pulled apart, the discussion pulled apart, and have a 1, 2, 3 triple whammy hit me, and kind of have that professional ego really kind of get beaten up a bit. And I think it's more efficient, so that once you can sort out the real intent of this paper is, and here's the argument we're going to try to build. And once we've agreed on that, then we can make sure that we align the results and the discussion in the appropriate way.
And just thinking about, the editing process, and I have a couple scenarios. So one is any, I guess, advice or recommendations for someone who might be more junior on the team and might be hesitant perhaps to input their edits or revisions with more senior members?
It's hard if you don't feel you have agency, and you're in a team where you feel that way to be brave and to say, okay, I have a different perspective. I think in the best version of that, the team has built a relationship that says, we're really here in service of the project or the idea. And that there's been enough of conversations well before you got to the manuscript phase where you've built trust within that group and you've built professional rapport. And ideally, you have a senior member, either the senior investigator, the principal investigator, or just a senior member who's a collaborator who is attending to interpersonal dynamics and group dynamics as well, and is ensuring that all voices are being heard. That's the ideal situation. Failing that and finding yourself as a junior individual who feels, oh my gosh, what's the professional or personal consequences for me if I speak up? It's all about framing and how you frame it. And you may decide, rather than doing the copy editing and taking apart the sentences, to choose to go up to that more kind of reviewer level where you provide an argument for a counter proposal for how a section is written out with an example paragraph. And suggesting it that way, you might want to recruit another individual. So it's the perspective of some members of the team so that you don't feel off on an island all on your own. I'd say it'd be very rare experience with the teams that I've worked with, and even when I was junior in my own kind of writing, that people felt really isolated or feel they didn't have a voice or didn't have agency. And maybe that's because the context of health professions education is not the same as we're writing the clinical trial for some big CIHR grant, multi-centered, wherever. Maybe the stakes are lower in terms of academic prestige, thankfully.
Excellent advice. And we've talked more about editing others' work. Any advice or recommendations when you're editing your own work?
So I really think that you should not write and edit simultaneously. I think you should write as fast and as hard as you can to get the ideas onto page. And the writing process will be really laborious if you try to write the first paragraph and then look at it and say, oh, I got to fix this first paragraph. I don't like this. And you spend all this time crafting the first paragraph. And then you have this beautiful first paragraph. That's all you got is a paragraph. I find editing to be a simpler task than the first draft. And so if you can get a first draft out and down and breathe a sigh of relief, even if there's big chunks and holes of you have placeholders here that says, I got to come back and get this idea here. But if you can get that first piece out and done, recognizing it is terrible and recognizing how embarrassed you will be. And everybody says everyone's first draft is terrible. And then you see people pass around their first draft. It's really the third draft. They've just edited that themselves a bunch of times. I think if you're reviewing your own work, is get that first draft down and then go back and review it. And then if you're not ready to share it with anybody, take a break. Take a break of a couple of days so that you can actually see the forest again. Because you can get so in there that you end up with writing that feels kind of tight, circular. You're struggling for this one little way to say it, and it doesn't really need to be that said that way because you just get rid of that whole paragraph anyway. So take a step back from it and relax for a bit, think something else, and come to it with slightly fresher eyes.
Just want to thank Jonathan for sharing your insights around editing and cutting our own work, and others as well.